her. So 43 million, not great, but nothing to shake a stick at in terms of, number of Americans tuning in. And the fallout continues for Tim Walz on the disastrous performance he delivered, in particular when it comes to his self-described knuckle-headed behavior, which was just his latest in a series of lies. The reason he resorted to, I'm a knucklehead, was he got confronted with his latest lie that's been unearthed. There's a long list of them. This one was that he was in China when the Tiananmen Square disaster unfolded, when hundreds of people were killed. You know whether you were in a place where hundreds of people are being massacred by their government when it happens. But he continues to try to say, like, oh, gee, I was just kind of confused. That happened in May and I was there in August, but I guess I just imagined that I was there, whatever. So he got asked about that debate moment where he completely melted down on Wednesday in Pennsylvania, and here's how he handled it.
Look, I have my dates wrong. I was in Hong Kong in China in 1989. That move from Hong Kong into China, it was profound for me. That was the summer of democracy. I said it's where I understood how sacred democracy was. It's what encouraged me about 15 back and forth with my students, taking them to China. I speak like everybody else speaks. I need to be clear, I will tell you that, but here's my whole point on that thing with China. I do understand China a hell of a lot better than Donald Trump. Kamala Harris understands China. My clarity to take away from the message is something I want to be very clear. August of '89, into Hong Kong, into China, 15 times with students to try and do this. My point being on this, Kamala Harris and I understand American jobs are more important than where Donald Trump tried to save Chinese jobs.
Okay. So once again, the excuse for his lies, Michael, is I speak like everybody else. This is not the first time he's done this. I lie like everyone. Everyone lies. I'm not the only one. It's really what he's telegraphing. Remember the interview with Dana Bash where the issue of his stolen valor was brought up for 2 minutes? Watch. Remember?
You said that you carried weapons in war, but you have never deployed actually in a war zone. A campaign official said that you misspoke. Did you?
Well, first of all, I'm incredibly proud. I've done 24 years of wearing the uniform of this country. Equally proud of my service in a public school classroom, whether it's Congress or the governor. My record speaks for itself, but I think people are coming to get to know me. I speak like they do. I speak candidly. I wear my emotions on my sleeves, and I speak especially passionately about our children being shot in schools and around guns. So I think people know me. They know who I am. They know where my heart is. And again, my record has been out there for over 40 years to speak for itself.
And the idea that you said that you were in war, did you misspeak as the campaign has said?
Yeah, I said we were talking about, in this case, this was after a school shooting, the ideas of carrying these weapons of war. And my wife, the English teacher, told me my grammar is not always correct.
The excuses with this guy for his lies, Michael. It's amazing to me that he continues with this and people aren't now just referring to him as pathological. Your thoughts?
His grammar is not always correct. Like when he's diagramming those sentences in the first grade, he accidentally mixed up the part where you're supposed to say, I never served in combat, and he substituted the one where he said, I did serve in combat, I was at Tiananmen Square, my wife and I used IVF to conceive our child. I mean, the real takeaway from this is, one, Tim Walz's low opinion of people. He says that everyone's a cynical liar. And in his defense, most of the people around him probably are cynical liars. The establishment media, the Democrat politicians, and he's very practiced in this himself. The other big takeaway, though, and it's where I have a little sympathy for the guy, maybe not empathy, but sympathy for the guy, is he has no good answer here. Because people very rarely lie a little bit. People very rarely lie about one thing and never about anything else. Either you're an honest person or you're not an honest person. Either you endeavor to be honest or you endeavor to deceive people. And so people do sometimes have a slip of the tongue. But that's not what's going on with Tim Walz here. In that first clip that you played, Megyn, Tim Walz and he lies so much this wasn't even really noticed. He cops to another lie he's told. He's previously said that he's visited China 30 plus times. He said he's visited China on another occasion dozens of times. There, you heard him say that he's visited China 15 times. I don't know if he even knows how many times he's visited China. I don't know that he can any longer discern between truth and falsehood. He lies with ease, and there's a great deal of wisdom to the old idiom. What a tangled web we weave when we practice to deceive. He can't keep up with his own lies, and so he totally burned down on stage. He's dissembling there in front of the press now that certain uncomfortable questions are being asked, if just so that the press can maintain even a shred of credibility. But for the people who are criticizing his answers, what else is he going to say? The guy's lied about all the most important things in his life. He's lied for decades, and he continues to lie today. What's he supposed to say other than, whoopsie daisy, you can't trust me?
He's a serial fabulist. He lied about being a retired command sergeant major, which is a post he only held temporarily and didn't actually earn. He's not allowed to call himself that. He lied about carrying a weapon in war. He carried a weapon, presumably as a National Guardsman, but he never went to war. He lied about the IVF thing when he'd only had IUI. His wife had IUI, which is a totally different procedure. He lied about getting a commendation from the Nebraska Chamber of Commerce, which wasn't true. Now he lies about going to China 30 times when, in fact, it was half that, 15, which he was forced to admit when the Minnesota public radio folks called him up to say, where's the evidence that it was 30? And his campaign, after weeks of delaying, had to admit it wasn't 30. Now it's only 15. Now you hear him saying that. He lied about being in China when Tiananmen Square happened. And it appears he even lied about his son witnessing a school shooting, a shooting, which it was a comment he made when they were discussing school shootings at the vice presidential debate on Tuesday night. That's what the subject was, the school shootings. And this is where Tim Walz took it. A lot of people, I'm going to confess, members of my own team, people I was with, were like, I don't believe it, because he does embellish over and over again. And it appears this was yet another instance of it. Here's what he said, and then we'll do the fact check.
Well, I think all the parents watching tonight, this is your biggest nightmare. Look, I got a 17-year-old, and he witnessed a shooting at a community center playing volleyball. Those things don't leave you. As a member of Congress, I sat in my office surrounded by dozens of the Sandy Hook parents, and they were looking at my 7-year-old picture on the wall. Their 7-year-old were dead, and they were asking us to do something. And look, I'm a hunter. I own firearms. The vice president is. We understand that the Second Amendment is there, but our first responsibility is to our kids to figure this out.
Senator.
Tim, first of all, I didn't know that your 17-year-old witnessed a shooting. And I'm sorry about that, and I hope that he's doing okay. So. Christ have mercy. It is awful.
Well, it turns out, Paul Sperry at Real Clear Politics tweeted this out first, that the son was inside the community center when this happened. It was a shooting that occurred outside the community center. And it, not for nothing, but it had nothing to do with a school shooting. It was two people involved in some sort of a workplace dispute around the community center. There's just a constant need to embellish, to make it more than it was, so that it makes Tim Walz look better, or like he can relate more to an issue. It's a problem.
Megyn, I think you're being a little nice to Tim Walz here, okay? Embellishment is when you say 50,000 people came to my rally and it was really 47,000. When you say I was in Tiananmen Square when you weren't, when you say my wife and I used IVF when you didn't, when you say I carried weapons in war and you never went to war in a combat zone, it's just a lie. The guy just lies. And I thought what J.D. Vance did there was so brilliant. His whole debate performance was absolutely magnificent. And I thought in tone, in substance, he was just right on the money. What he did there, though, I thought was so brilliant, which was he didn't question Tim Walz's story, which he would have been totally justified in doing because Walz has lied about so much else. He just doesn't have any credibility. But he didn't question the story. He didn't appear insensitive. He didn't appear aggressive. He just called attention to it. You heard he said, wow, Tim, I didn't know that your 17-year-old son witnessed a school shooting. Christ have mercy, that's so awful. And then he moved on and made his point, which flagged that. It made that moment unmissable. So when the fact checks inevitably came out, they would point out that once again, Tim Walz is lying. And this is really disturbing because everybody, sometimes we exaggerate, we engage in a little hyperbole, and sometimes people tell lies. And then, if you have a conscience about it, then maybe you go confess your lies, you feel bad about it, you apologize for it. But when people engage in the kind of pathological dishonesty that Tim Walz has done, that is a big red flag. That's not different in degree from saying my crowd sizes are bigger. That's different in kind. That is engaging in a kind of fraud and deception that should send a chill down the spine of anybody who might be living under a government in part run by this guy.
It's really disturbing because he mentions the son as the amount of damage that is done to a child who witnesses something like a school shooting or a shooting at a community center would qualify too. It would be something that you'd definitely remember if he had said, my son witnessed the murder of another person. My God, what? I mean, that's a very small slice of the American populace who's actually witnessed something like this. And the careful parent, responsible politician would say, my son witnessed the aftermath of one of these things, and that was bad enough. And then you would stick with the actual trauma. He claims to have sat with the Newtown families. He claims that one of the students who was involved in the Parkland shooting, David Hogg, is a close friend of his. You would stick with people like that and say, I've spoken with kids who were in these schools or family members who lost kids in these schools. That kind of trauma doesn't heal, whatever. But you would not inject your own child in it and try to attribute that trauma directly to him on something it appears he did not witness. Now, maybe there's a scenario, Michael, that comes out in which his son wasn't playing basketball or what have you inside the community center, but happened to be staring out the window at the very moment this happened. We'll wait to see. But he deserves no benefit of the doubt, none whatsoever, because at this point, it's like another Tim Walz lie. It must be a day ending in Y.
Well, of course, and Megyn, you heard another lie even within that statement. He said, I'm a hunter, I own guns, the vice president is. So I guess that refers to the vice president is a hunter. I doubt that she even owns a gun, but the vice president's a hunter? No, she's not. Right. That just isn't true. That's a lie. And then there was, I thought the clearest lie during the whole debate was when J.D. Vance, again, subtly, respectfully, quite persuasively, pointed out that as governor of Minnesota, Tim Walz signed a law to remove reporting requirements for babies who survive abortion and who are born alive, and to remove the requirement that physicians provide medical care to those babies who are born alive after surviving abortion. And Tim Walz said repeatedly, that isn't true, that's not what happened, I didn't do that. And when J.D. Vance pressed him and said, okay, well, how is that not true? All Tim Walz could say is that's been debunked, it's been fact-checked, it's been debunked, it isn't true, and it manifestly is true. Even the New York Times had to admit this today. And as the New York Times admitted it, they lied about it too. They said that J.D. Vance's claim was false, but then if you read the explanation as to how the claim is false, the New York Times admits, yeah, actually, Tim Walz did sign that law, and yeah, he did remove the reporting requirements, and yeah, he did remove the requirement for physicians to provide medical care. So it was a stone-cold lie. There is no way you can convince me that the New York Times editors didn't know that. As far as I can tell, I think they're still literate over there at the New York Times. And there's certainly no way you can convince me that Tim Walz was unaware of a law that he himself signed. That is...
Absolutely.
That's psycho stuff.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely right. There's something wrong with him. You signed it. It was a big deal in Minnesota. The vote in the House and the Senate came down exactly on party lines. They have slightly more Democrats in Minnesota in their state house than they do Republicans, which is how they got this through. But this was not a situation in which they had crossover. They had widespread agreement on this. This was hard fought. The Republicans knew what it meant to say we're not going to require medical care for these infants. And Tim Walz signed it into law. He knew exactly what he had done. And yet here's the exchange Michael Knowles just talked about.
You're free to disagree with me on this and explain this to me, but as I read the Minnesota law that you signed into law, the statute that you signed into law, it says that a doctor who presides over an abortion where the baby survives, the doctor is under no obligation to provide life-saving care to a baby who survives a botched late-term abortion. That is, I think, whether you're pro-choice or pro-abortion, that is fundamentally barbaric.
These are women's decisions to make about their healthcare decisions, and the physicians who know best when they need to do this. Trying to distort the way a law is written to try and make a point, that's not it at all.
What was I wrong about, Governor? Please tell me, what was I wrong about?
That is not the way the law is written. Look, I've given
but
this,
how?
I've given this advice on a lot of things, that getting involved, getting engaged, that's been misread, and it was fact-checked at the last debate. But the point on this is there's a continuation of these guys to try and tell women or to get involved.
Okay, so I want to get into this. I looked at this law. I looked at this law prior to last night. We've been talking about Tim Walz and his radical social policies for a while on the show. Here is the law. Okay, it is Section 56, Minnesota Statutes 2022, subsection 145.423, subdivision 1. It is amended. Tim Walz became governor in 2018, and they amended it in 2022. It took effect in 2023. Subdivision 1. It used to read recognition, medical care, a born alive infant as a result of an abortion shall be fully recognized as a human person and accorded immediate protection under the law. This piece of it was passed before he became governor in 2015. All reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant. That's how it used to read. Tim Walz got into office and he changed it with the Democrats in his state house to now read recognition. Medical care is crossed out. Recognition, care, it now reads. And instead of a born alive infant as a result of an abortion, it now reads an infant who is born alive shall be fully recognized as a human person and accorded immediate protection under the law. All reasonable measures consistent with good medical practice, including the compilation of appropriate medical records, shall be taken by the responsible medical personnel, and they crossed out to preserve the life and health of the born alive infant and changed it to all responsible medical personnel shall care for the infant who was born alive. Do you no longer have to preserve the life and health? You just have to care for the infant. What this means in the law and what they so heavily debated in Minnesota was the switch from medical care to comfort care is how it's referred to, because this is a thing that's happened in many states where they've had this debate between the pro-lifers and the pro-choicers. Must you try to save the baby that you just tried to kill in utero, but you failed and somehow the baby was born alive? Must you provide life-saving care, or must you just provide so-called comfort care until the baby expires or lives? And in Minnesota, he changed the law to say no medical care is necessary. You can just do comfort care. And secondly, he revoked the requirements that they keep track of the number of babies this is happening to. And here's the other thing, Michael. Well, let's just stay there because then we'll go next level next. But those are the facts that J.D. Vance tried to raise and that sociopath denied repeatedly, getting indignant saying, that's not true. You're trying to distort the law and the way it's written. This has been misread and was fact-checked at the ABC debate. Those are all lies.
If it's so easy to fact-check, if it's so easy to debunk, then why don't you just do it, Tim? You've got the stage. That's the point of a debate, is to defend your record and to propose your policies. So the reason he has to point and say, it was vaguely fact-checked by some other people on some other network is because he's trying to pass the buck on lying to somebody else, because this lie is so without credibility. You know, we know what comfort care means here. The other Democrat governor, Ralph Northam, explained it in an interview that the left-wing media are trying to deny and debunk and hide. But he said exactly what it means in this scenario, which is if the baby survives the abortion, the baby will be put on a table somewhere and kept comfortable while a conversation ensues between the doctor and the mother. The comfort is the comfort of neglect and the comfort of death. Even at this term when it's used in less egregious ways. Any person who's ever had a loved one enter into hospice knows exactly the difference between life-saving medical care and comfort care or palliative care or hospice care. The former is designed to keep the person alive. The latter is designed to await death. That's all that it's for.
But what they do in hospice care is a lot kinder and gentler than what they do to these babies who, again, they just tried to kill, but they survived it anyway. I'll give you this, Michael. I went back and looked. There's an EMT who's a GOP state representative in Minnesota. His name is Jeff Backer. And he said I'm trying to read my own writing. I think it's Browns Valley or Bonus Valley. Anyway, he's a GOP rep in Minnesota. And he also works as an EMT and said he had a 21-week-old born in the back of his ambulance. And he said, if I gave that 21-week-old who was born in my ambulance, quote, comfort care and only comfort care, I would be charged with murder. Quote, comfort care means lay on a hard surface. Comfort care means lay on a hard surface, maybe a blanket. That's a Minnesota state lawmaker who is objecting to this shift, saying this is barbaric, what you guys are asking to do now to these infants. So you're exactly right, only it's even worse for these infants who don't have any of the advantages that a fully grown elderly adult would.
And the reason they have to use euphemisms, and the reason that Tim Walz in this case is really just trying to avoid the issue entirely, say, it was already debunked, it's been talked about elsewhere, move along, rights, freedom, happiness, women, joy. The reason they have to do that is because whether you're talking about medical care or so-called comfort care, which, as you rightly note, Megyn, doesn't involve very much comfort for these babies, you are acknowledging that the baby is a human being, the sort of creature that is entitled to care and that can benefit from care. But also, as you rightly note, in abortion, the baby has just been the target of an attempted murder. So the baby has survived the abortion. The purpose of the abortion is to kill the baby. The baby has survived, as sometimes happens. Well, what are we going to do now? You're faced with the irreducible and unavoidable humanity of the baby. That's why Tim Walz has to move off of this. And for many years, with abortion being a controversial issue, especially among people who just don't have a totally coherent set of policy views and don't think about politics all that much, they're a little wishy-washy on the issue. Republicans have argued that we need to be focusing on abortion where it is most clearly egregious, where it's the most easy to understand, and that is late-term abortion. And you want to talk about lies during this campaign. During Kamala's debate with Trump, and we've heard it ever since then, they have denied that late-term abortion happens in America. That's not true. There's a lot of late-term abortion in America. And if a late-term abortion weren't happening in America, why would Democrat governors like Andrew Cuomo, or like Tim Walz for that matter, seek to enshrine ever more rights to late-term abortion in recent years? That's the first question. But then the second part they say is, late-term abortion doesn't happen, and when it does happen, it's always to save the life of the mother or for some extreme medical necessity. That also is not true because we don't have a lot of reporting requirements in a lot of states. We don't have great data here, but the data that we do have suggest that late-term abortions happen for the exact same reason that early abortions happen. This is frequently elective because people just wait a long time, or they weren't told that they were pregnant, or because they, for whatever reason, financial stress or personal relational reasons, just don't want the baby. And so the response to that is to kill the baby. Well, when we're talking about it at the late term, as J.D. Vance, I thought, masterfully did during the debate, we see why that is barbaric, why that is inhumane, and why I think that's not going to play in Peoria, which is why Tim Walz has to get off the subject.
Tim Walz could have said, we ran the numbers, and the vast majority of cases in which a mother aborts her third trimester child, it is because the infant has been catastrophically injured in some way. Something is catastrophically wrong with the infant in the womb, and the mother is painfully making the choice to try to spare this infant whatever's coming its way, some horrific life, that will last 2 days, etc. Pro-lifers would say, still not okay. Many pro-choicers would say, that one's okay with me, okay? He could have said that, but instead he just lied and said, this doesn't happen. This is all lies. It's been fact checked. You're misreading the law. Those truly are lies. I want the audience to understand me. I am not some pro-life advocate who's out here all the time like Lila Rose. I am telling you the truth. The law is exactly as J.D. Vance said, and Tim Walz lied. So that led to this exchange that was pretty remarkable on CNN, where they had 4 against 1. Scott Jennings is the sole Republican who goes out there. And this Alyssa Farah, who's the pretend Republican who goes on The View and CNN, she was there. And so was David Axelrod. He's a Democrat. Anyway, watch this. Okay, watch.
Walz totally lied about the post-abortion infant bill. Totally lied about that. And number 2, he totally sidestepped it is true. He totally sidestepped the question about what restrictions do you prefer, just like Harris. I mean, he essentially ratified the position, which is no restrictions.
Because I do not think that's what the Minnesota law states. I wish that Republicans would stop saying, they're allowing babies to be killed once they're born.
Just think in Minnesota, there were 8 deaths among infants who survived abortion attempts during Tim Walz's tenure as governor. It happened. They don't want to talk about the fact that it happened, but there were children.
What's the source?
First of all, let me ask you a question. Since you deeply researched this, what were the condition of these? Yes. Of these babies when they were born? What was the participation of the family?
They tried to abort the babies, and they survived the abortion, and then they died.
And you think that families casually tossed them aside?
No, I think.
Tell me what their condition was, Scott. Could they have survived? And was it a case of families not wanting children to suffer who were, when they were told that they are doomed?
If I couldn't articulate a single restriction, I would attack Trump.
This is what Kamala Harris and Tim Walz believes, is that it's none of your business what women do with their body. And so stay out of our doctor's offices and stay out of our bedrooms.
Well, I guess I have to speak up for the babies. They're not here to speak for themselves. Lord have mercy.
She rolled her eyes. She rolled her eyes when he said, I have to stick up for the babies. Now, let me give you the data, because we've been following this closely on the show. There's a great piece by the National Catholic Register, and people might roll their eyes that it's a Catholic organization. Go ahead and look at the article, because it offers all the arguments of the other side, too. They've got a lot of people who were in favor of this law, and they give their voice a full hearing. But they did a very good piece on exactly what went down in Minnesota around these numbers. David Axelrod, listen up. During the 8 years that the Born Alive Infants Protection Act was in effect, that's the one that was passed in 15 and stayed in place till 23 when Walz repealed it. The state's health agency reported, and they had to report back then because Walz had not removed the reporting requirement yet, 24 babies. It's not 8. 24 babies were born alive after an attempted abortion. Now, some of those preceded Tim Walz becoming governor. In 2015, listen up, David, talking to you. 2015, it was 5. We're just talking about one state. 2016, another 5. 2017, 3. 2018, Tim Walz becomes governor. It's 3. 2019, 3. 2020, 0. 2021, 5, 2022, 0, 2023, and 2024, we don't know, because Tim Walz started telling the hospitals, you don't have to tell us how many. We don't need or want to know. All 24 died. All 24 of the infants born after an attempted abortion that was botched died after they were left on the table. 10 had fatal fetal conditions, quote, incompatible with life. 4 were medically pre-viable, meaning they were too underdeveloped to live on their own. We don't know what week they were born of the pregnancy. 2 were, quote, barely clinging to life. I don't know what that means. Barely clinging to life to me does not mean you let it die. It means you try to help it live. And at that point, they were required under the law to at least try. 2 were barely clinging to life. As I said, 1 in 2016 had transient cardiac conditions, and 1 in 2017 had a low APGAR score, which really just means the baby needs medical attention. It could be something like insufficient oxygen. So again, these are conditions that under the new law, they would not be required to try to save the babies, and they could potentially live. Somebody with just a low APGAR score or a transient, meaning temporary cardiac condition. Anyway, all of this happened. And then Tim Walz becomes governor in 2018. And from that point forward, 11 babies at least were born alive and died. And it's going to be more than that since we don't know 23 and 24. The 8 others, Michael, were described when reporting was required only in, quote, vague language. For 7, comfort care measures were provided as planned. For 1 in 2017, no specific steps were taken to preserve life, or at least no specific steps were reported. So we really don't know, but these were not all catastrophically doomed babies from the sound of this reporting. There were some who had, I don't want to say mild, but low APGAR score is at least ambiguous. Transient cardiac conditions, again, ambiguous. And I'm sure it doesn't get much better from there once the reporting requirements were lifted under Tim Walz. This is a travesty. And the fact that this guy didn't get a fact check from the super ready to engage on climate change and illegal immigration fact checkers at CBS News is just disgusting.
It certainly is. However, I in a way have some sympathy for that last lady on the panel who just rolled her eyes than I do for Alyssa Farah, the fake Republican from The View, or David Axelrod. Because Alyssa's point was just to not understand the law or to lie about the law, and as though we can't look it up, as though you can't just read what's in the law and see the effect of it. So that was ridiculous. David Axelrod's point was ridiculous too, though, because he tried to suggest, he said, why are you implying that these people are just casting aside their children? How dare you suggest they were just casting aside their children, which by definition they were. They had gone in to have an abortion, to kill the baby through abortion. And so this is what makes the law so difficult for the Democrats and so inconvenient and so incoherent for that matter. If it's legal to go in and kill the baby, but then moments later, when the baby is in a slightly different place, it is a legal requirement to provide medical care for that baby, then why were you permitted to kill the baby in the first place? How come moments prior it was completely legal and in fact celebrated to murder the baby, but then 90 seconds after, let's say, 2 inches removed from where the baby just was, it would be a heinous crime. It would be murder to kill the baby, and you actually have to provide all the medical care possible to allow the baby to survive. What changed? Nothing really changed. It's a completely incoherent stance. And so that woman at the end who just rolls her eyes and says, hey, listen, you shut your mouth. You let us kill whatever babies we want. You let us kill the baby in the womb. You let us kill the baby outside the womb. You let us kill the baby wherever. You shut your mouth. You have nothing to say about this. That's actually the most coherent view from the pro-abortion side. And I think even a knucklehead like Tim Walz knew that that was not an acceptable response to give on the debate stage. So he was counting on the people in the media to continue to cover up and lie for him, which is exactly what they're doing.
Yep. Her name is Ashley Allison, the eye roller. Here's the other thing before we take a break. Walz also put a stop to state funding for the pro-life pregnancy centers. So while he's saying you can have an abortion through the 9th month, which he did in another law, and repealing the protections for babies who survive abortion attempts or are born alive, he also pulled all the state funding for the pro-life pregnancy centers, which provide childcare, medical care, parenting classes, free clothes, free diapers, assist with adoptions, and provide educational support for moms who are considering either having the baby and keeping it or having the baby and giving it up for adoption. So this guy, I mean, that's what JD was saying. He was like, the Republican Party needs to get better at that piece, providing real support for moms who feel like there's no other option than an abortion and showing them, no, there is a real other option. Even if you don't want to keep the baby, we're going to make this as easy on you as humanly possible. You can give it up for adoption. There are loving families who would love to have this baby and raise it. And unsaid was, you didn't want that either, Tim Walz. You pulled the funding so that women who don't want to kill their babies in utero have another meaningful option. It's just the absence of honesty on the abortion issue in the press it really might be the most egregious problem in the press. I'm not kidding. It might be worse than the climate change agenda. There's just everyone in the media is pro-choice. Everyone, Michael.
Well, you can always tell, Megyn, how dishonest people are being about a political issue by the number and intensity of euphemisms that they're using to describe that issue. So in the case of abortion, which is in itself a kind of euphemism for infanticide, they'll never use certainly the term infanticide, and they increasingly don't even use the term abortion. They'll say women's health or reproductive freedom or choice or whatever. So that's usually a sign that they're trying to distract you from a harsh reality. But then on this word choice, I think Tim Walz has just proven that he's not pro-choice. If he were pro-choice, he wouldn't be defunding the pro-life pregnancy centers.
That's
right. He would
right.
be in favor of giving women a choice. But he's not. He doesn't want women to have a choice. He wants women to abort their children. He is in favor of abortion, and unfortunately, that is now the mainstream position of the Democrat Party.
I mean, it's horrific. I will say for the record, thank God, I have never had an abortion, and I never would have an abortion. This is not why I don't give my own personal opinions on abortion. But I do want people to know it's not because I've had one. Because the people who are the most pro-abortion are, I think, the women who have had them. I mean, they're just, they come out and they're, what's her name? Was it Joni Mitchell who was out there this week? Oh, God, wait a minute. Who was it who was out there this week? It wasn't Joni Mitchell. It was...
Joni Mitchell did not have an abortion, actually, as far as I know.
No,
I think she actually gave birth.
It wasn't Joni Mitchell. Forgive me. It wasn't. Stevie Nicks. Thank you. It was Stevie Nicks who wrote this pro-abortion song that was making the rounds like a week ago. And she gives an interview about it. And she's like, I'm just heartbroken about, the inability to have children. Oh, I had 4 abortions. 4? You had 4 abortions? Like, it's just absolutely outrageous. There are women who use abortion as birth control. And that's why they want to make sure it's available all the time and they don't want to see or hear about the pro-life center. They feel guilted by the fact that other women might make a different choice if provided with the information. And Tim Walz and his friends just said, oh, no, those are just centers where they pressure you out of having your abortion. Pressure Megyn, or just educate?
This is a really important point that you're making, and I think it's an important point for the GOP in terms of communicating, and it's an important point for women. There is something, I think the number is about 1 in 4 women will have had an abortion at some point in their lives, and that number seems quite inflated. It's from the Guttmacher Institute, which is the think tank for Planned Parenthood. From what I can tell from those data, the number is actually fairly reliable. I know a number of women who've had abortions. All of them regret it, and almost all of them explicitly regret it, and some of them merely implicitly regret it. But it can be a big burden. And I do think you're totally right. I think that the reason why a lot of women support abortion as a matter of public policy is because they've had one and they feel guilty about it. And of course they feel guilty, and some of them were duped and deceived and didn't want to acknowledge the moral reality of it. And then when one becomes aware of the moral reality of it, the guilt is so absolutely awful that to look at oneself in the mirror, one could not admit that reality. Now, the happy side of this is there is redemption and forgiveness. That's at least
right.
The Christian idea, and I think it's true. So this is the real trick of the devil here, is the devil tempts you to sin, and then you sin, and then he never lets you escape your sin, and never lets you, and in fact impels you to make that sin worse by doubling down on it and defending that sin. You don't have to do that. Everybody commits terrible things at different points in life, and even the most terrible sins can be forgiven. You don't need to double down on scandal and suffering, and in this case, infanticide, just because you feel guilty. There is forgiveness. You're welcome on the other end of it. You can move on in your life. Things actually can get better. That's something that the devil and the Democrats don't want you to know.
Yes, so well said. I mean, to my fellow women who have had to make this choice, my heart goes out to you. I'm sure it was absolutely awful for most people, unlike Stevie Nicks. Let's do it again and again and again. But I don't think the answer to dealing with the severity of that choice is to then just run around encouraging other women to do it too, or worse yet, to deprive them of information on how another option is there for them and what it might look like and what kind of families could be helped by your making another choice, why wouldn't you at least consider it? Even though in the moment it could make you feel bad, if you choose to have an abortion after the fact, it could make you feel worse, it's true. But why wouldn't you, given the gravity of this decision, at least keep open the option of another choice and education about it? Okay, I feel better having had that discussion because it's really been bothering me how they're talking about it. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be right back with Michael Knowles. More to get to ahead. Kamala Harris is proposing massive tax hikes right now, an almost 40% top income tax rate.